Hello, everyone, and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Liz Owen. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Director of Communications at PFLAG National. It's really great to have you with us again for our show. I don't want to waste any time because we have two fantastic guests this week. So let me bring on our host, my friend and colleague, Jean Marie Nevada.
Liz Owen.
Jean Marie, how are you?
I'm good. So I'm showing everybody my newest toy. I have the Laverne Cox Barbie doll. I'm very excited about this. I wish you could see her better. She's beautiful. Her dress is magnificent as always.
How much do we love that?
It is so exciting to think that the same doll line that I was playing with as a little girl now is honoring people like Laverne Cox. How cool is that?
It's gorgeous. Enjoy her.
I definitely will, and I'm definitely going to enjoy today's show. So thank you for starting us up, Liz.
My pleasure.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jean Marie Nevada. I'm the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National, and I use she and her pronouns, or ella if you speak Spanish. Every single week, we get together to talk about something related to equality and inclusion for people who are LGBTQ and their allies. And this week, we are actually talking about Juneteenth and Black Pride, and I have two of my very favorite people coming on to help us with this conversation. So for those of you who like reading our articles, we have a great piece that was in the Buckeye Flame. It's actually a year old, but I really loved the article, and it really focused on how Pride Month would not exist if as we know it, if Juneteenth didn't happen. So if you want to read that, you can always go to straightforequality.org/discussion series and grab the article and the discussion questions so you can have this conversation too. So we have two guests who are speaking to today, and I want to bring on our first one, my friend and colleague, the president and CEO of the Center for Black Equity, Earl Fowlkes. Earl?
How are you? Thank you for inviting me. This is a really great pleasure for me. Thank you.
I am always so happy to see you, my friend. Thank you so much for making time for us, because I know it has been a busy Pride season for you.
Yes, always. June is always a busy month.
It is. It is. We don't sleep during June. We start sleeping again in July, I think. So, Earl, for those people who do not know about the Center for Black Equity, can you please tell everyone just a little bit about it and how they can locate your organization?
Sure. The Center for Black Equity is an organization that was founded in 1999. It's basically a collaboration of about 45 Black Pride organizations around the world, most of them in the United States, but we have about 8 abroad. And basically, we work through 3 pillars to build up our community and to make our community healthy. And that's through health equity, social equity, and economic equity. And those are the pillars that we operate from. And we have programs that we support our Black Pride partners so that they could do this work on the local level.
That is, it is such an important organization. And I think the work that you're doing to, I think, bring more people in to this conversation and to organizing is just so critical. So I want to get right into our conversation, because this has been something that's been on my mind a lot. And I really appreciated, when we were looking for articles for this week's show, the perspective of the article that we were looking at, because there was a quote in the article that actually, let me read it. It said, "Pride Month would not exist if as we know it, if Juneteenth did not happen. It all comes together as we recognize that the most marginalized of any group is generally the BIPOC members of the group." So here's my question for you, Earl. As we see more people learning about Juneteenth, which is a holiday which has existed since 1865, this commemoration, although it was not officially made a federal holiday until 2021, as we see more people learning about things like Juneteenth, as we see more of the Black and African-American figures in our community being elevated and talked about, are you seeing consistently more people becoming engaged on the issues that our Black colleagues and friends are encountering in LGBTQ spaces? Do you think that this
Well, it's hard to measure, to attribute this to Juneteenth because Juneteenth is a new holiday, and most Americans, including most Black Americans, did not know about Juneteenth. I think it's a continuum from the George Floyd, from all the other things that have been going on. This is one more tool in the toolbox to get people to understand the intersectionality of being Black and being LGBTQ.
I want to actually directly talk about how things have changed since the summer with George Floyd, so 2 years ago. One of the things that I've noticed, and that some of my colleagues have also noted, is that in the summer of 2020, we saw a lot of attention being paid to issues of racial justice. We saw a lot of protests happening. It was very much front of mind, no matter where you looked. Any place that you looked, this was happening. And yet my sense is that some of that intensity among some people who started to learn about what was going on has declined a bit. Is that your perception? Do you think that we are as focused as we were 2 years ago?
Well, we've had the COVID-19, we've had the war in the Ukraine, we've had inflation, we've had high gas prices, we've had all these other things that deflect our attention from this particular issue. I think it's been, for me and my organization, we're still having the level of dialogue and support that we received over the last 2 years. It's been down a little bit, but people are still talking about it. And we want organizations and companies and people to institutionalize these conversations, not just have one and out. But there are going to be things that are going to happen that are going to knock these things from the news, from the front page of the news. And that's that's life. But, it's up to people like PFLAG and for the Center for Black Equity to maintain these conversations and to, when we have these opportunities to talk about them, to bring them up.
I appreciate you saying that. I recognize that there are all of the competing issues, but I think my level of frustration gets really high fast because it felt like there was such momentum. But you're right, there are other things happening. But I think it is on us to actually keep these conversations going. In what ways are you seeing these conversations being continued? Are you seeing this happening in corporate spaces? Are you seeing this happening in LGBTQ spaces? Are people still sort of pushing forward? And are you seeing sort of any new evolutions to this conversation?
I think that the conversations are continuing. I've been invited more by corporations to speak about Juneteenth and LGBT pride, which is excellent. This is almost like a dream to be able to talk about being Black and being queer. I never thought the day would come when I would be invited by corporations and large corporations to talk about this and be welcomed and to be affirmed when I do so. It's been a really exciting, and it's happening mostly in June, but it's happening throughout the year. I love history, and when shifts take place in history, you look for the long-term impact, not the short-term impact. Yes, the Juneteenth was made a federal holiday. My nephew, who's 15 years old, didn't know what Juneteenth was. I had to explain to him what Juneteenth was. So people don't know. And so when people understand, and when I explain it to them, and then I explain to other people, like, oh, I didn't know that happened. Wow. Yes, people were enslaved. The Emancipation Proclamation didn't free all slaves. And people didn't know that. So Juneteenth is a benchmark in American history, which allows us to talk about all the other benchmarks in American history. And this is an important conversation. And like I said before, I've been invited to speak about this, not just during June, but through other parts of even in February, Black History Month, I've been invited to talk about being Black and queer. This is an evolution, and I never thought this would happen. And it's very pleasing for it to happen that I've been in these spaces. And I think it's going to continue. But again, like I said before, it's incumbent upon organizations like PFLAG and CBE and others to bring the issue up. Well, what about, the intersectionality being Black and queer?
I think one of the things that has been most exciting for me over the past couple of years is, people like us get invited to do a lot of panels and speak on things. And as I look at the panels, they look different. They are not the same panel that I saw 10 years ago. And I think it is just so exciting to see faces that do not all look the same, and it's not all the same voices. Mm-hmm. So I so appreciate when you say this is kind of a dream come true, because I always wonder, is it really happening? And I think it actually is. So you mentioned that it is incumbent upon us to keep these conversations going. It is incumbent upon us to remind people that Pride doesn't just happen in June, and we don't just talk about Black issues during the month of February. The article that we shared with people this week had some suggestions for would-be racial justice activists, people who are very interested in this. What kind of things do you say to people who say, I want to be more supportive, I want to try to help in this? What am I supposed to do?
Well, first of all, your points are excellent, because the reality is that as a queer person, as a African American, I need allies. our people need allies. We cannot do this work without allies. We make a very small percentage of the population. The United States is huge. I think sometimes we forget that. We have 300 million people in this country, plus in this country. So we make up 10% of the population. So I'm a double minority. And so we need allies. And what I suggest people to do is to support organizations like PFLAG and CBE, because we both are working and doing important work. But more importantly, to get involved in your local groups, and not just invite them to the table, because we always get invited to the table, but come to them and bring them to the table. And when they get to the table, introduce them to everyone around the table, make them feel welcome at the table and wanted at the table. And I think, that's what I suggest. Funds, money is important. We can't do the work without money. However, is access. If you give me access to 400 corporate people, you don't have to give me any money. I'll get my money my own way, and give me access. And those are small things, but for organizations like our organization, they're very important. They're critical.
Yeah, I think it is about opening those doors. One of the things that we are always talking about is don't just get people into the table, but help people into leadership roles, create spaces for people, because it can't just be that you showed up once and had one conversation. I think it's about how do we create those spaces so people are permanently at the table and that the table feels empty without them, because that's what I think people should be experiencing. One last question for you, Earl, which is, are there any particular resources that you would point people towards, as they are sort of on their learning journeys? Is there anybody that you've been reading lately that you really like, or any particular websites, blogs, anything like that has been of interest to you that you think people should be paying attention to? Because so much of this comes by recommendation.
Well, our website, the Center for Black Equity's website, there's so many sources. I was looking the other day as I was preparing to talk about Juneteenth, and I know every nuance about the thing, but I'm always afraid I'm going to forget something. There's so many resources out there. If you pull up Juneteenth, you pull up intersectionality, you pull up, there's just so many, there's thousands and thousands of pieces of information. I would just warn people to understand what Juneteenth means in the big picture. The big picture is, I had to think about what Juneteenth meant, because my family, as far as we can trace, is we were brought slaves, and we were mostly in the North Carolina coast. And I've had people say, well, Juneteenth doesn't mean anything to me because it didn't free all the slaves. And I would say this: think about the day that those people found out that they were free. The joy, the jubilation, the fear and trepidation. They had no money. They didn't receive anything for their toil. They held their clothes on their back, not a penny to their name, walking away from a plantation, which has probably been their home they never walked beyond 5 miles of the plantation, going into the world with nothing, with the hope of wanting to be free and all that freedom brings. That's what I think about.
Wow. I have to be honest, I don't think that I've ever completely thought about it that way. And the absolute joy, I think, and real fear that there had to have been about what comes next, knowing that legally emancipated, but not necessarily ever equal in terms of how people will be treated.
And trying to find your family, because your family's been split up by, uncaring, cruel masters, finding your children, your parents, your siblings. The fact that Black people have achieved so much despite not having any help from society, or any retributions or any pay for their toil is incredible to me. And the inner strength, and that's what I try to tap in every day when sometimes I wake up and don't feel like doing this. I remember what my ancestors who had nothing achieved, and I'm privileged to have what I have. What little I have more than they did.
That is quite a perspective. Earl, thank you so much for spending some time with us. It is always such a treat when I get to talk to you.
I love it.
I am so appreciative of the work that you do and the perspectives that you always give to me. I always end up sitting after we talk and thinking so much about the things that you've said. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Please come back and talk to us again.
Oh, anytime you invite me, anytime you're back, I'm going to say yes.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Earl. I always get excited when I have an opportunity to talk to Earl, but I want to continue this conversation and bring in a completely different perspective. And to do that, I want to introduce one of my friends and one of my colleagues, PFLAG National Board Member Robert Marchman.
Hi, Jean Marie.
Hey, Robert, how are you?
Pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride to you as well.
Well,
Joy
you know,
and celebration.
I'm so excited about this conversation, and I'm excited about the connections that we're making. We started the discussion with Earl a little bit earlier, talking about the connection between Pride, civil rights, Juneteenth, because we are looking at all of these issues together. So I am really excited to get your perspective. So, you know, we were talking about the fact that in the article that we shared with people who are watching this week, the author makes a connection between Juneteenth as an example, maybe civil rights more broadly, and that without that, we would not be having many of the conversations about things like LGBTQ equality that we are having today. So what is your take on this? What is the connection? Do people fully recognize this connection? And do you think that we are adequately recognizing some of the contributions of the activists who came before us to get us to where we are now?
Sure. Well, one thing I need to do professionally, just so I am here in my proud hat as a PFLAG board member and PFLAG dad, but also I think it was noted professionally, I am the senior policy advisor. So for the SEC on diversity and inclusion, just want to make clear everything I say today is my own views and no way represent those of the commission or any staff. So with that stated, so when I read the quote and the statement, it resonated in this way. Focusing on Juneteenth, the actual event back in 1865, started, if you will, a series of events where the struggle for civil rights for people of color, and we could talk about the Civil Rights Act of 64 and other, there's acts in between, actually led to rights and opportunities for others who are not in that community. And it has been my view that I don't think there's been an adequate connection or recognition of how those struggles play into opportunities that others in the community, not in the community, have benefited from, and why it inures to their benefit to be allies and part of the struggle. With that said, to your question about what I have seen with regard to the recognition of Black activists, it depends. It's a work in progress, candidly. And what I mean by this, you talked about Earl. So if we talk about Black Pride organizations, Earl's organization, front and center, it's something that folks are aware of, the heroes who led the movement. If we talk to non-minority led organizations like PFLAG and others, it's a work in progress. And that I think if you look, you will see that there are people being recognized. But if I were to ask people about Andre Lorde, people would like, who, what? So there's an effort. It needs to continue to have an understanding of the roles that these individuals played in the establishment of Pride Month, and some of the rights that we all are the beneficiaries of.
No, I think I love that you mentioned Audre Lorde. I think it is only over the past few years that we have started to see more people making these connections and really elevating these voices. I just remember the first time I was teaching a class and somebody who I was teaching actually knew who Marsha P. Johnson was. And I thought, this is progress, but it shouldn't have taken until just a few years ago before I heard somebody saying her name back to me. And I think it speaks to how much work we still have to do.
Correct. And even to that point, when you hear about the Stonewall Inn and what took place, too often Marsha P. Johnson is not connected to that event. And candidly, even in some depictions that have been done in media, and we can talk about that, it is kind of whitewashed. And so persons of color who actually were the drivers of that movement, and giving Marsha P. Johnson props for even the fact that there is Pride Month, right? That recognition is something we have to do more of, and doing that and educating folks will go a long way. You'll hear me talk a lot about the importance of allyship, and that is something that is critical to PFLAG, an organization that I've been with for a number of years and love for a lot of reasons. But that the more folks get educated, the more they can understand, frankly, the struggles of others, and think about strategies to work together, because we need to develop strategies, particularly now, working together to deal with the issues that are confronting our community.
You know, and I appreciate you saying that, because I feel like a couple of years ago, when we were observing this summer, where we were all able to see George Floyd being murdered on television, we saw so many organizations and so many individuals jumping to action. It was a big wake-up call for a lot of people who, frankly, had not been paying attention. And there was a real intensity to that summer, and there was a real intensity to the time that followed. But it feels sometimes to me that some of that intensity has let up, that we are now 2 years away from that. Nothing, in my opinion, has improved that much. We haven't seen many of the changes that we identified as needing to be addressed. Is this something that you're seeing too? And what do you think is behind it? Is it just that it has been replaced by other issues, or does this largely speak to the challenge that we still have of really, really getting into the issues of racial justice and how difficult this work actually can be?
Right. So I'll just put it in context for those in the Black community and community of color. Unfortunately, we've seen this story before. Rodney King, Mother Emanuel Church, Charlottesville, the list goes on and on, where what I call the cycle of inaction, that there's an event, people protest, then there's grieving, and then people wait to the next. I mean, unfortunately, even the tragedy in Buffalo, which I mean is now even dissipating from people's minds. And so yes, we've seen this before. In my view, the vigor, the emotion, the passion, the commitment from many seems to have waned. In the LGBTQ plus community, my observation is some of that has been due to a focus on a number of the anti-LGBTQ plus and transgender legislation, which is, rightfully required a focus and pushback of people aligning. But that doesn't mean that in doing that you should lose sight of, again, the bigger picture and racial justice. And as we stated at the outset, an understanding that if we work together for the rights of all, it benefits the entire community. So they're not mutually exclusive. And my concern is too often it's like things get put into buckets rather than folks looking at it from a holistic perspective and working together and understanding that it's, moving the ball really inures to your benefit, whether you're a person of color or not.
I think one of my points of frustration, Robert, has been exactly what you said, that it kind of everything gets put into a bucket. And I think sometimes we approach this as we can only address one of these issues at a time, at the same time that we're often saying words like intersectionality, which forces us to recognize that we cannot possibly address these issues one issue at a time, because they are all connected. And because they all do speak to the power structures that we have access and do not have access to, and how that changes experiences. And I think that it gets a little bit frustrating for people. And I think it does raise questions about priorities in different communities. I appreciate you to say that there's so much legislation we're looking at, but I think there's also so much legislation we're looking at that broadly hurts other communities. For example, voting issues. damage both communities of color and LGBTQ communities too. And I feel like sometimes that message doesn't come through. Is that your sense too?
Yes, that was actually one of the areas I would point to that has been disappointing in terms of the waning of support, and in my view, a lack of understanding of the connection to the importance, because it's what I see folks not understanding is that really those of us who are in the other category, and by the way, that's a lot of people, including many of my my white brothers and sisters, because what they need to understand, to some, if you're not on their team, you're on the other team. So what people need to understand is collectively, these rights and efforts all flow together, because if you lose one, the domino effect starts. So a lot of what is being talked about, going to individual rights and liberties, and really just understanding, that we're all humans beings and have a right to be to equity and equality, and frankly to be loved. All these flow together, and by focusing your attention on one and not all is really not an effective use of resources.
No, it's not. And I think, it gets to that, we start treating equality like a zero-sum game, that one has to come at the cost of the other. And that is an absolute fallacy. And we need to call that out, because when we help one group, we are elevating and creating systems that are better for another group. So, we're PFLAG, we love giving people some direction on what to do. As we work through this year's Pride Month, as we get to this year's commemoration of Juneteenth, what are your suggestions for people who seek to be better allies, especially in communities of color inside of our LGBTQ spaces? I think there are lots of people with good intentions, but action on those intentions sometimes falls short. What are the kind of things that you tell people or stop doing?
Well, take action. Allyship, in my view, means action. Right? The A in allyship also is A for action. So at this point, I'm frankly tired of hearing the good intentions, good words. Take some sort of action. It doesn't mean that you have to, be out in the city square if that's not your thing. But just think about how you can leverage your individual influence to help those who are in the out group. So that's one. Resources, I would say, be educated, get educated on the issues, talk to individuals who are in the out group who really can use your assistance. And I would, resources, PFLAG, the Center for Black Equality, and the group headed by my good friend Mark Morial, National Urban League. Yeah. With regard to what I'd like to stop hearing, what I'd like to stop hearing is those who are involved or in what I will call majority groups, non-minority, saying we have tried to reach out to the community of color, but we don't know how to reach them. And what I would say to that is, if you're trying, then you're not trying hard enough. And you need to think about how you can go to the places that they are, as opposed to, for example, convening a meeting in a place that is inconvenient for those folks to attend. And also not being mindful, and Jean Marie, you talked about this, is very important, the impact of intersectionality. Because for persons of color, there are other issues that we are dealing with that frankly are difficult, and racism, discrimination, just trying to live, that may make it difficult to focus on some of these other issues. So I'd like to see more empathy, but stop with we tried, but we can't do it. Make it happen. That's my admonition. Make it happen.
Go to people. I love that you said that. Go to people. Don't sit there and wait for people to keep coming to you, because that's not an excuse. That's not the way this happens.
Correct.
Robert, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here. I always get excited when I get to talk to you because I always have such good advice and guidance afterwards. I so appreciate you. Thanks for spending some time with us, and happy Pride Month.
Again, my pleasure. Thank you, and happy Pride Month to all those that you're watching. And there's a lot for us to do, so let's keep working together to make sure that the Equality Act is one of the things we got to get passed. So thanks all. Have a great afternoon.
Robert.
Thank you.
Well, everybody, that wraps up another show. As usual, I wish I had another hour to talk, but we do not. We will be back again next week with another great conversation. But please listen to the advice that was given. Go to people. Recognize equality is not a zero-sum game, and action is on you. Try harder. We wrap up the same way every single week, reminding you to run fast, laugh hard, and most of all, be kind. If you need help, please visit us at pflag.org/find to locate your nearest chapter. Otherwise, we will see you next week on Something to Talk About Live. Bye, everybody.